Evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 4th joint governance meeting of the Pine-Richland School Board with focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions. We will move directly into item 2.01 and Mr. Pasquinelli, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Tutulio. Again, we wanted to pick up as we discussed last time we were together in March, time flies for sure, to talk again about Policy 832, so that's definitely here on the agenda for us to discuss. Really want to save the majority of time to get conversation going around that policy, but a couple things just to provide some updates for everyone. So those are our three agenda items here. Is again, spending a little bit of time. We think it's important we continue to talk about our definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, just to reinforce those definitions. We mentioned last time we talked about the internal audit, so we want to discuss the internal audit briefly with you, and I've come up with a process that we think, again, is a good process to gather that input from our internal stakeholders. And then, like I said, the majority of the time we want to spend on Policy 832. We always pause on this slide, again, just to reiterate the importance of listening and collaborating throughout. So that circle there, the core team, is consistent with meeting with all these different groups. Again, by no means does the core team have all the answers. The core team has a lot of questions, has a lot of opportunity to learn and grow as well, but that's that one consistent group that works with all the others as well. So from the last time that we were together, we obviously had some core team meetings and talking about that process for the audit. We took some time with individual board members, so all 9 board members had an opportunity to meet one-on-one with our core team members and listen for specific feedback. And hopefully if you had a chance to both look at the red line version of 832 and the current version, that you definitely see your voice in the modifications to that policy based upon the feedback that board members provide, and we'll talk through that tonight as well. So that continues, as we think about what's going to be happening in the last couple months of the school year. We have our expanded team meetings that will be coming up. We still meet with the Anti-Racism Coalition. We're planning a first-time face-to-face meeting, which we really haven't had. So we're looking forward to having that group out and talking about next steps. We're going to conduct the audit, the feedback from the audit, and then we'll have our final council meeting, and that'll kind of close out this year in terms of what we've accomplished, and then we'll start thinking about plans for the future. So again, just important for us to see that and understand so many different groups. Our building-based teams are key. We've talked about this before, the fact that they're the ones that are working and deepening the understanding of these definitions, trying to apply them so we can, as we think about this next slide, like why? And this slide is all about the why. It's about helping all of our students prepare for life after high school. So that's the portrait of a graduate. Schools mostly talk about the academic part of the portrait of a graduate in terms of things like credit requirements and whatnot, and that's actually on our board agenda tonight in terms of our AR for graduation requirements. But this is about some of those other skills and readiness to interact with others post-high school, and all the things that guide us and lead us in making these types of recommendations and determinations. So the tightening of the loops, that is representing continuous improvement. And when we collect information from others and we learn about areas where we're strong and areas where we have opportunities, that's about getting better, and that's all that this is about. It all was on the foundation of our strategic plan, so that we call that, that's our map for where we're looking to go into the future. That was a very collaborative process, and that's where diversity, equity, inclusion was first discussed, and we started thinking about what it would look like down the road. And of course, we all know our mission, vision, values, and we think about the experience of every student in the building every day, and what does it mean to be in an environment where you feel confident and comfortable learning. That is what this is all about for all kids, regardless of background, race, experience, needs. We're trying to figure that out so your child and every child that comes through the doors here has as good of an experience as we can provide for them, and know that people learn best when they're in that comfortable environment, and that's what we're trying to work through. So again, we're not going to spend a ton of time, but wanted to just, again, reiterate these. So in the past, what we've asked you to do is to write down the definitions as you recall them without looking forward in the slide. But it's a good practice. So we've been doing this with our building principals over and over again. We have done it because, again, when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and what those definitions mean to us, it's important that we get on the same page in terms of what are those definitions at Pine-Richland. And then when we think about implementing different practices or policies, we want to fall back on the consistency of those definitions. So I'll pause for 30 seconds to see if anybody has any comments there, and at that same time, you can internally, or if you want to write down what those definitions are, and then we'll check it here in a second. Okay. Okay, so again, definitions, as again, we have defined them here, all the ways in which people differ: diversity, fair treatment, access and elimination of barriers, equity, and engaging and individuals in all groups so everyone can participate, feel welcome, and valued. So again, those are the definitions that we've been working through, sharing, and discussing with, again, not just board members, but everyone that we're interacting with here. So when we talk about it, we know we're all on the same page. Okay, so first topic before we get into the policy is around the internal audit. So we talked about this at the last meeting. We have an audit that is a third party. That was a recommendation to not create your own, but use a third party audit. We shared that with everyone, so if you had a chance to see that audit in the past. This is our proposed group of committee members. So again, you can see that they are all internal. So this is an internal audit. We do not, are not recommending bringing anybody from the third party to conduct the audit or to analyze the results. It is for internal analysis and understanding. And those are the groups of people that we have, again, across all of our stakeholder groups, internal stakeholder groups. We try to represent as many as possible with not, overwhelming the group too much. Okay.
So you can see on this slide, what we were trying to do was think through how to organize the way in which we would conduct that audit, knowing that we have a number of people, a cross-section of different stakeholders, different voices that we need to have present for each. And so we took a look at each of the criteria. So that's what you see in the first column, the colored section. There's school policy, assessing community needs, school organization, administration, and school climate environment, for instance, which we see as being similarly grouped topics that would have folks of a similar nature together. So we have our board representatives, district administration, principals, teachers, and paraprofessionals as some folks that we would want in the room to be able to answer questions around that. And again, remember, we're coming to consensus. We'll all be looking at the questions and collaboratively coming to consensus on where we land as a district on each of those measures, the way this was designed. So what we were thinking is, you can see there's a group A, B, C, and D, each of them made up of a different cross-section that's applicable to the types of criteria that we're assessing. And we would have those groups meeting in 4 different locations, facilitated by one of us who would also be in the room to ask the questions to help guide that discussion, and then eventually come up with the consensus around where we fall on the spectrum in terms of the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium audit for this internal look.
And the only one we're still kind of beating them up a little bit is that fourth group, because the way it was designed was to be a staff member or teacher self-reflection. But we're still talking through how we would want to approach that. We do have a number of surveys, as you know, come out this time of year, between technology surveys and our annual stakeholder survey. So thinking about how we want to approach that to gather the insight from a teacher's perspective, thinking through those different criteria there, strategies, curriculum, classroom management, interpersonal practice, and then teacher behaviors that encourage student persistence. Great opportunities to look at those and reflect on current practices. And again, like we talked about earlier with the tightening of the loop, is you learn from the results and then make appropriate recommendations from there. So we'll pause there. We made the modifications to our annual stakeholder survey. We talked about that at the last board meeting. Those will go out sometime in May. And then we have this internal audit that we're going to work through with our internal stakeholders. And again, more of a collaborative discussion. We do have some board members that are part of that committee as well. So we'll pause there for any questions, comments.
So, Dr. Pasquinelli, you and I have met, when we were, and one thing that we talked about is that this equity audit is just going to be like one small part of how we look. It's not this get our results and we're going to be off and running. It's just going to be one small way that we look at what's going on in our buildings, and then some of the other data that we hope to get, like when we can look at some of our groups and see how students are performing, in all areas, and academically and engagement and so forth. Correct?
Yeah, and
Okay.
we actually, based upon your feedback and others, Ms. Turchek, that's now in. You'll see that in Policy 832 as well. It literally mentions the fact that this is one piece of information. Like we assess kids on many times over the course of the year. We want to assess our school district's strengths and opportunities in multiple ways, and this is one way to do that. So this plus other things that we're doing to help guide our recommendations for sure.
And is the thought behind doing the audit, doing it as a group? So we would be in a group together, question asked.
Right.
And we would then, have a dialogue around the answer.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we feel like, because there's so many perspectives within these groups that I think will benefit from hearing those and coming to a consensus of this is where we see ourselves at this point. So it'll be good dialogue, and it'll be good learning experience for the different people within the groups to hear the perspective of others across, our internal staff. Okay, anything else? So the plan is probably in late April, early May to conduct this audit. We haven't selected a date yet, but anyone on the committee we'll be speaking with. We're thinking probably late afternoon, and large group, breakout, back in large group, and then get the analysis, and we'll be sharing analysis with the board and community once that's completed.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Did we? I don't know. Dr. Miller, were you planning to say something? No. Okay, I saw someone reaching for the microphone over there. I'm going to ask the question. In our last meeting, there was a lot of discussion around the term equity. And I see in the new policy we've changed the name of the audit. Still includes equity, but now it's a diversity, equity, and inclusion audit.
Mm-hmm.
Are we using the right tool, something called an equity audit, if we don't have agreement here around the word equity?
Well, I'd say the questions within the name of the tool is Mid-Atlantic Equity Audit. I mean, that's the name. So we've reached out to them to ensure that we can use their resource to help guide us in this piece of information. As we look through the questions, under each of those criteria, in parentheses are how many questions. And those questions span so many different topics. I mean, they use the word equity, but if you look at it, they're talking about English language learners. They're talking about teachers' practices and differentiating and supporting all students based upon their learning styles. So there are concepts that support diversity, equity, and including kids in different groups and encouraging kids to be part of and reach out to different groups. So we feel like the equity audit spans diversity, equity, inclusion. It is just the name of the tool that we're using.
I think last time too, we talked about if there were more board members that wanted to be part of it. Just
Sure.
raise your hand. Okay.
Yeah, and that's open at this point. If anyone else wants to participate, by all means, we can add to that committee.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
I see that we have just 5 teachers from 3 different schools. Is there a reason we're not having teachers from all the schools involved in this?
I would say our thinking was grade spans and trying to keep it to a number that is manageable, because we're thinking about when we get to these breakout groups, if the groups get too large, then we want to ensure that everybody's voice is heard. So those that are on the committee have been part of the expanded team, and we've kind of talked about that role is always about interacting back and making sure that there's good collaboration between person on the team and back to school. So they are, to a degree, representing obviously a larger group of people. It's something that we, again, could definitely consider, is expanding that out and having a few more teachers engage in it.
If there would be any differentiation between schools that we don't.
Yeah, it's not a bad
recognize.
idea. Yeah, I think we could consider bringing at least one from each school, and we typically do that in other things. So I think we could manage that, sure.
And some of that, I think, too, happened as a function of the many hats that some folks wear. So obviously, Mr. Vins, we have him as PREA president, but also he's representing the teacher group, so that hits Wexford. But we had an elementary, Joanna Furman, who is a representative on our council. They happen to both be from Wexford, but again, it's because of their roles in the way in which I have them. But a point taken, to add some of that diversity would be good.
Mm-hmm.
In that same spirit, I can't help but to wonder if a few more coaches would be helpful. I know Donna will do a great job, but she's the only coach.
Yeah, it's like, where do you stop? I mean, that's where we were with this initially. Can revisit that for sure, but
And perhaps
we've got to think about it.
Originally, too, we were thinking maybe we would have a Group A and a Group B, and they would have 2 sessions back to back. Now that we've expanded to groups A through D, perhaps if we did make it a little wider, the groups within each session could be a little larger because they're going to be somewhat smaller. Perhaps that's a way that we can look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were the people on this committee, did they volunteer? You selected them? Like, or is it a little bit of both?
Yes, I'd say both.
Okay.
Some have been part of either the expanded team for a period of time. They may have volunteered to be on the building level team. That's a possibility. And some are, again, just trying to ensure that we have all of our internal stakeholders represented if some were a reach out.
And then I just had a question that doing this audit is in the policy 832. Just we have to have 832 needs to be passed, and then we can do the audit, or is the audit separate from that? Like, how is that?
We had conducted this audit last year as well, and that was obviously without anything. So it would just be a learning mechanism for us to collect information and data to inform discussion going forward.
Yeah, but again, remember, last year it was more of a discovery, so we learned about this audit through, there's a lot of different resources out there, but PA Department of Ed has a toolbox that provides for schools for some suggested resources. And that, along with the work that we were doing, if you think about the circle slide from earlier, is learning from others. So we, with our small DEI core team, expanded team, tested the audit, and then the council had an opportunity to participate in the audit. And that was our first time through it. And we learned how much we didn't know, and that was one of the powerful things about it, asking questions of things that we hadn't considered. And for those that were participating, because they don't have all the different lenses, they couldn't answer a lot of the questions, so we weren't getting a lot of valuable information back. That's why we think this is going to be much better, having different groups in the room, having a conversation, looking at it through different lenses. So we did a small group last year to get a little feel for it. This, again, is focused just on this internal group and more of a collaborative process and getting through it.
So I would answer that again as clearly as from my perspective. Regardless of what happens with 832, we believe this is a powerful learning experience for our district to go through and see what we learn through the process, and would not want this to be held up by the other if it doesn't go forward, or by so they're related, but I don't think one, I think we should move forward with this regardless.
Follow up to Amy's, I don't know if my microphone's not on. Follow up to Amy's question about how individuals are selected. Are we missing people if a lot, missing insights if a lot of people who are participating in this are self-selecting because this is something they're interested in, and not getting more information from people who haven't thought about participating in these issues.
I think it's possible, but the way that in which the questions are phrased, it's kind of like, do you have this in place or not? So the gray area sort of becomes eliminated by just having folks in the room talk through that. The clearest example in my mind are the questions around staff. So Mr. Glickman's office is going to have a lot more information that even some staff members might not realize are processes that are happening in the background, and the ways in which we advertise positions and so forth. So I think it's through that common conversation that we'll get to the answer, sort of eliminating anything that would have been more perception. It's really, do you have it or don't you? And if you're not sure, you mark not sure. And I think we've shared with this group in the past, we had a lot more not sures than otherwise when we were trying to have individuals complete it who, again, when we had the leadership council do it, there were even parents and so forth on it who might not have understood some of the internal procedures, and, we can communicate that better, but at the same time, it's things that maybe weren't understood and lived in the same way. So I think by having the group complete it together, that'll become more clear.
It may be the opportunity, though, again, in that purple section where it's meant to be now this is from a teacher perspective, so this would only address the teacher stakeholder group, but we could expand that out if we land on more of a self-reflection. So if you can't participate in the conversation audit, but still, if you're interested in taking the audit for a self-reflection and some more information for us, then I think that would be a great way to do that, and that could be a voluntary option. So those that haven't but want to voice their opinion, that haven't perhaps been as connected, that'd be a great way to do that.
Maybe just to follow up with Christine's question, any feel for ballpark how many other folks were volunteered to do it versus were selected?
I'd say probably a handful-ish. The majority are in some way have been part of the conversations that we've been having, so have some background and experience with it, but I'd say much smaller percentage are those that we reached out to and asked them to participate. Okay, anything else with the audit? Okay, it's great feedback. We appreciate that. We'll again make some tweaks and modifications and get that date out and scheduled, and look forward to the results and sharing those out. Okay, so
I'm sorry,
yep.
Can I ask one last question?
Absolutely.
Dr. Miller mentioned you did the audit last year. Was it the same tool that you used, or was it a different tool?
It was the same tool
Okay.
from the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium. Yeah.
They have modified it for this year, so there are some modifications, but it is the same foundation, yeah.
And it was a smaller group of people who participated.
The way in which that was different.
Yeah, last year it really was an independent experience, and that's where we got, like Kristen said, there was a lot of I'm not sure, because they just didn't have that perspective. This will be so much better to have different groups in the room and really talk through it.
And if I remember correctly, we did that with a survey, right? It was
Right,
It
yeah,
was,
we
it wasn't
actually-
in groups. It was individual. I have a vague memory.
We
Now
took
you're saying that.
that exact survey.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the problem.
We took the exact survey, put it in a Google form,
Yeah,
and then
that's
sent it
right.
out. And then we were able to kind of analyze that way. And yes, there were areas where it didn't help us with much clarity. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And remember, we color-coded it where we felt like we had areas of strengths, opportunities, red, yellow, green, and
The colors helped me.
thank you. Good, yeah. I'm glad. All right, so we want to spend the rest of the time on policy 832. So if, are you guys going to pull that up can we pull that up on the big screen if somebody has the? So again, for board members, we provide red line versions for you to see that as well. So you can see where 832 was on March 14th, the last time we were together, and then we had the opportunity to speak to everyone, listen to everyone, and hopefully you feel that and have seen that throughout, that we continue to say it's a collaborative process, and it is. The feedback that we get, we take, and we make modifications. And again, the goal is back to where we started, is the portrait of a graduate. It's about student experience at Pine-Richland, how we can improve upon that so they are ready for life after high school. That is, again, what this is all about. So a policy provides us with some of that weight and guideline for things that we believe are great things for us to be doing for our kids, for this district, for constant and continuous improvement. So if you'd like to take a second just to glance over and the entire policy, and then we can kind of work through it. But at this point, we want to do less of the talking, turn it over to the school board, and allow you to have some dialogue and conversation related to the revisions.
I don't really have a question about this definition for achievement gaps, because I think it's an appropriate definition. But I know some of this we're looking at more than just achievement, more than academic achievement. So I don't know if there's a different way that might want to get worded. I know there's opportunity gaps by number 1 at the top. And I think that's, of course we want to look at academic and achievement because we are a school, but we also want to look at other factors, that, kids might not be, engaged or, falling, behind in other areas like that.
Yeah, it's soft. It could go under inclusion, right? We could be more specific. I think we've gotten less specific in certain cases, which is for the better for this policy.
Is this just achievement gaps that you were talking about?
Well, I was sort of following on Amy's point, right? Saying achievement gaps say this, but that's limited. There are other things, and I'm suggesting those other things would, certainly some of them could be interpreted, I think extracurriculars, inclusion, right?
One of the areas that I've heard concerns from some families are AP courses and honor courses. We don't have the data, so we don't know, right? So that falls into, is that an opportunity gap or is that an achievement gap? In my mind, that would be an opportunity gap, right? Because we haven't looked specifically to make sure that students of diverse backgrounds are getting in at the same rate as others. So would we consider that achievement, or would that be more of an opportunity gap?
Well, the prior version did have both.
It did, yeah.
So maybe we consider going back to that, perhaps. This revision for me was a significant step forward. And so thank you for the work on it. I know that a lot of work went into it. So for me personally, it's very close to something I can support. The only question I would ask is, can we get equity out of there altogether? That would be the only thing that would be left. You did take it out in a lot of places. Where it is, I could potentially live with, but I would just want to ask that question.
Yeah, I'd say, again, and we discussed this because we heard that feedback before. The reality is it's a term that's important for us to be able to use. It's like you can't, through this work, we've got to be able to use the term. But that's why we keep showing the definition over and over and over and over again to land on, that's our definition of equity. So we feel like we need the word. We're doing audits that have the word equity in it. And the question comes up, well, what does that mean for Pine-Richland? Here's what it means for Pine-Richland. Where is it supported? It's supported within policy. Here's a clear definition of what equity means for Pine-Richland in our policy. So we feel like we have modified this language based upon your feedback, but completely eliminating the word equity from our policy with our definition of it, we don't think would be appropriate.
And Mr. Stobner, if you scroll down a little bit to the definition of equity on the policy there, if you could.
And I
It's
would-
on
It's on that
Page
first
one.
page. Go up a little bit.
bottom of page 1.
Keep going up. It's a bolded term. Oh, okay, gotcha. We put that, the note in brackets afterwards too, because we were listening and hearing how sometimes that could get confused as representing equal outcomes. And in order to plainly say we're stating equity is this, Pine-Richland definition inserted, it is also not, and then tried to clarify that. So I don't know if that piece helps, or if there's anything else about that that, if included, if that's another place that we could capture it, so that we know we're speaking about our Pine-Richland definition and what it represents to us here. So if there's suggestions,
Well, it definitely
Let us know,
helps. I
too.
mean, like I said, it's very close. I read this and felt like, yeah, this is kind of what I had in mind after our last conversation. So, but I would be remiss not to ask. But thank you. Yeah, thank you. You're doing good.
I have a question, and Mark, maybe this helps, because I think some of the concern on any of this is around vagueness, or, on page 2, I have questions about the action plan, and I'm hoping, and really anyone in the administration can answer this. So this is unique for policy. It is and it isn't. I think there's actually a lot of policies where there are plans are required, especially in special education, that just don't rise to our level of visibility and are just constantly done. So, talk about that a little bit for me. The other aspect is annual necessary? What does that look like year over year? How is this different than what lives in our strategic plan? Should it be highlighted this way? And then finally, if it's not too much, first bullet point, unlike most things we do, this one's pretty vague. Embed, I like it, I'm okay, rah, but not sure what to do with it. Number 2 and 3 and 4, I'm going to feel pretty good about saying we did that or didn't do that. I'm going to have a harder time with 1. So I guess a couple of different points there. Compare and contrast with strategic plan or other annual requirements, and then how do we address the fluffiness, frankly, maybe the first bullet point.
I think I'll go to point 2 first, if that's okay, and then I'll come back to point 1. So in terms of what we're trying to capture there, it's just a reminder that the lens we're trying to look through, with regardless of which type of policy we're creating, is one that we want to have in mind diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that while this is an umbrella policy kind of explaining our vision for what we hope to have here as an inclusive environment, we're thinking about these things, how does DEI find its way just as a lens through which we can look anytime we're discussing things, so that we're aware of anything we might otherwise miss. So that's what it's meant to say. If there's a better way of saying it, we can certainly capture that too. That was the intent.
And when I'm thinking about your first statement, some of our policies can stand alone without an AR, right? They're that level of detail, and that's where we think 832 is. Although it's somewhat vague, it has specific guidelines for us to follow. So we wouldn't anticipate an AR to go with 832. And in some of our detailed policies, it talks about things like action plans. I think about like resources that we review and materials that we gather, but if you look at an AR, it's going to have that level of detail around building out action plans and implementing action plans. So feel like it's okay having that here in terms of a expectation of annual versus something again a little more of updates as appropriate. We're comfortable with annual because we believe it's that continuous opportunity for improvement for us to look at on an annual basis, but are open to have more of a conversation related to, if we leave that a little more open-ended is fine.
And I understand your point too, Peter, because right now we're at the beginning of this process where we're trying to build these things and make sure that they're happening over time, that we're looking at the data, that we're not asking the question, are kids getting accepted at the same rate? We don't know the answer. We need to have the data to do that. So that's something we would begin doing annually. So once it's baked into our process, does it live like this in the same way? I think it could get rolled into when we're doing things like the Academic Achievement Growth Report, we're showing that through that lens. I don't know if it's going to stand alone as its own report per se. It would be more around, we're using these measures, we're reporting on them, and we're sharing where we are with things. And that would happen at least annually as we look at student performance and things like that.
I don't know if it helps, but like that you're asking about number one specifically, right? So again, I think of the word integration. So if on April 18th, Mr. Glickman has a staffing update, human resources update for the board, and he does pretty much every April 18th every year, then we would expect to see next April 18th elements of this embedded within that annual update. Same thing with Academic Achievement Growth Report, same thing as we talk through other initiatives. So it's, I think ideally, like many things in an organization, when we get to a place where they're linked and connected and integrated, they become natural to a part of what we talk about and discuss. That would be the goal, and it's not it is a marathon, not a sprint, so it would gradually evolve that way, just like we've done so many other things.
And just correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression I get from this is that because the action plan is an annual plan, the plan would emphasize certain things. Those would be priorities. Those would be the things that would be looked for. The evidence would be examined and reassessed, and it would evolve from year to year.
And be subject to feedback.
Absolutely.
Correction.
Absolutely.
And oversight.
Anyone else? You good?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, I see people looking like they want to talk, but I don't.
I just want to give everyone a chance. So.
Go ahead, jump in.
So I wanted to jump back, and maybe this is building off of some of what Mark was bringing up, is in the purpose. And the fair and just allocation of resources feels very subjective, the whole fair and just, and maybe this is me who probably should have been an attorney, but didn't go that way. Getting hung up on words. I'm sorry?
I just want him to adjust the screen so
Okay.
people can see what you're talking about.
Getting hung up on words. If we're talking about, does it change anything if we take those words out and say that we are allocating resources based on each individual's student needs? I don't think it does. If we're looking at each individual student, giving them what they need to succeed, if we're getting hung up on words, I'm wondering if that's a
How about
place-
appropriate? What does that solve it?
We could just take it to the allocation of resources, opportunities, and treatment for students based upon each individual student's needs, and cut.
I
so
would be more comfortable with appropriate.
Okay.
I like fair and just, but would be happy to compromise on appropriate.
Hit the gavel, Mr. Tullio. We're good with that. Okay.
I like the alliteration by using the word appropriate.
Anyone else care to chime in before?
Should we get out the synonym finder?
Well, no, please, let's not.
I would
So-
say the same comment on page 2, fairness and justice under authority. Because they're the same words, just different. Same root, I should say.
So you come up with a synonym. Not appropriate isn't the right one. So what is it? What does it mean then? Top of page 2.
Yep, right there.
What does, because we have an authority statement in 103 as well, what does that say? I'm just curious. Does anyone have 103?
Yeah, good question, Mark.
Here we go.
All right.
It says here, the board declares, this is 103. The board declares it to be the policy, the board declares it to be the policy of this district to provide an equal opportunity for all students to achieve their maximum potential through the programs and activities offered in the schools without discrimination on the basis of.
What if we even used fair treatment? I mean, because that is in our definition.
Yeah, or just rewording that statement. Read that again?
Here you go.
May I look at it?
Yep.
Where is it?
The first paragraph right there.
To go to Dr. Justice's point, the board is committed to the principle of fair treatment for all students regardless of.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I like taking justice out. Justice almost gives it that legalistic kind of feel.
Just to be clear, there are some real broad and long historical connections to the terms fairness and justice. We don't need to get into all that tonight.
Yep.
So I'm okay with, fair treatment. I don't want to just wipe this out as if there isn't any meaning to what is there when fairness and justice are there. There is a lot to that, but we don't need to get into all that for our purposes today.
I do like the fair treatment. That's our definition of equity is what we're using. So, I mean, we should kind of keep our language, I think, consistent with that.
It's in parallel.
Yeah, that's right. It's in the definition of it, yeah.
I'd love to get. I keep thinking about your. I'd love to get into it, but I agree. I don't think it's here. I think it's a different conversation. But I agree. Yeah, I'm thinking of all the places where you can find it everywhere in our country in usage. Yeah. So yeah.
Do we want minor stuff like typos?
The he, or wait, is that?
Yeah, there's a couple. We can do that offline. Yeah.
We have a Barb Williams. Yes.
Okay. Barb, you want those?
I got them. There's a clear and double period.
There's a couple more. I'll give them to you.
So the last thing we just wanted to get feedback on is next steps with 832. So again, we've had multiple discussions around this policy. Would want to talk about bringing this policy forward and going through the three reads and get board feedback on next steps from where we are. So making modifications based upon your feedback tonight and then bringing that forward to begin the read process.
Yeah. For me, I still have a couple hang-ups, and it ties into what Mark first talked about. And I think it was Mark that may have mentioned this, because when we talk about equity in terms of what's defined here, and it talks about elimination of barriers. And I know it's kind of talked about below, not guaranteeing of equal outcomes, but elimination when I think of elimination, I think, okay, so I'm going to go out for the basketball team. My barriers are I'm 5'8" and I have a 2.5-foot vertical leap, right? So how do you eliminate that barrier, right? So I think it's an opportunity is granted, but not the guarantee, and that's where I get. So my barrier's not eliminated. The barrier of, and it wasn't a barrier, if you will, but the barrier of being able to go out for the team is there. Mm-hmm. But the barrier of my performance, which again I pull basketball because it's comical to watch me play basketball. So no one can eliminate those barriers for me. Mm-hmm. And again, I think of things like, I'll use my daughter for example. I mean, she has physical limitations that are barriers to her. There are modifications that offer her some opportunities, but all barriers aren't eliminated, i.e. she can't use certain bathrooms, she can't use certain stalls. So it's not eliminating, it is accommodating, and I don't know how to,
Well, the word that comes to mind is, I think of mitigation.
And that's where I am. And once we start doing that, then we get away from the staying with that term equity, and that's where I keep getting hung up. Because
Well, I think you're also looking at language with a filter and a lens, not a lens, a big hunkin' magnifying glass that we don't normally do. So in Policy 103, bullet point 4 on the first page says, we'll review programs, activities, and practice to ensure all students have equal access. Equal. The same. Passes, and we have a problem with 103. I mean, we don't,
Yeah.
we go back, when you take this microscope and apply it to these words and say, could this word be twisted in a way that is beyond our meaning? Okay, maybe, but I'm also suggesting that that microscope is, I'm not sure why it needs to be, sort of hauled out on this policy versus others. For instance, in 103, equal access certainly seems more problematic than eliminating barriers, if I were to take them literally or to, an irrational extent.
And I understand your point too, Greg, and it's we want productive struggle, to put it directly, within our educational process. So no matter what it is, kids need to be challenged at the right level.
Right.
So the concept is never to clear everything out of their way and have it be easy. That's not real life. We want to prepare our students for real life. They need to be resilient. We see that as a way of getting at one of our values. So productive struggle is a part of everything that we do, and it's about meeting people where they are to help them get to where they need to be. But again, with the note, not equal outcomes, not guaranteed success, not smooth sailing. It's that access and getting the chance.
Right. And that's where, I actually differ on the opinion of the equal access versus the equity and having that elimination of barriers. Like that equal access gets you there, but doesn't eliminate all barriers, right? It kind of gets you there.
Well, I think,
and I know it's splitting hairs, but that's where we are on this,
But it's what is the barrier, right? So if I give every child equal access to the stadium, there it is, and the rules say it's open till 5 o'clock every day and you're welcome to it, that's equal access. Isn't it? Or is it, I can't get to the stadium because there are physical barriers, or because those hours don't work for me because of other enrichment opportunities, so you need to eliminate those barriers. So equal doesn't quite get you there, right? When you talk about removing barriers, because you have to think about the individual needs and circumstances. I think what we're doing here is what would be called the legislative history. It's trying to take this term and say, what do we mean by it? I don't hear a lot of disagreement about it. What I hear a risk, or I'm not sure what that means. But when we talk about it, no one's disagreeing. No, I mean, nobody's suggesting that eliminating barriers rise to, I'm not sure what the concern is, right? What level of absurdity is it to be taken? I mean, there's a concern, but I'm not sure what it is. Because I think you can take certain language throughout policy and carry it to some logical extent, right? I mean, I think it's good that we talk about it.
Yeah.
And when you're worried about language like this, I think a familiarity with educational case law is important. And when you look at case law, and when I work with colleagues who work in this area, no one's expecting entire eliminations of barriers, but it's the terminology that is used, first of all, in educational language. Second of all, it is a good faith attempt is what you're going to see when it comes to case law. We need to make sure that school districts are making good faith attempts to eliminate barriers. And that would definitely apply to your daughter. Pine-Richland absolutely make good faith attempts. They provide her with a bathroom she can use. They provide her with tools that she can use. So when you're talking about education in a case law mindset, it is this idea that school districts are making a good faith attempt to provide access to students, educational access to students. And it's part of the language of education. And we talk about preparing students from Pine-Richland for the rest of the world. I spent some time the past week, and I told Peter this. I looked up Citadel, I looked up Harvard, I looked up Liberty, I know what Penn State's is, I know what Appalachian State's is. Every single university that I looked up had a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. In fact, I think it was Citadel's was equity, inclusion, and diversity, or equity, diversion, and inclusion. So this is language our students are going to hear outside of the Pine-Richland bubble. So I don't think we do them any favors by hiding from the language.
And I'd say, I mean, thinking about your basketball analogy, and Mark and I talked about this, but we used football as ours, but it's, the barrier is getting them to the court. If there's a barrier keeping them from getting there, but once you're there, you have to still earn the spot on the team. You know, so because you're short doesn't mean you're making the team. You have if there's any barriers to get you there, that's what the school would try to do to ensure that you have that opportunity, but then you have to perform.
It's funny because we do throw that equity is referred to a little bit differently than diversity and inclusion, right, Greg? Because equity in this context is an aspiration. In the first bullet point under the purpose, the language is a little maybe more along what Mark and you were saying, if you scroll up at the very top, which is the district is committed to identifying and addressing barriers, right?
Yep.
Equity in that definition further down, the elimination of barriers, maybe it's helpful to see it as some form of platonic ideal. That's what equity is in its highest form, right? What we're committing to here is to address those barriers.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the specific context also matters a great deal. So we are talking about basketball courts and football, but we're also talking about English and language arts and mathematics and students not feeling comfortable at school because of comments that are made by other students. And those are barriers for their even being able to show up and be open to learning. And so that's why some of this language of removing barriers or eliminating barriers matters a great deal. Those are important things, I think, in the context of what we're doing.
Well, in the context of it being the ideal, it makes sense. But just like the tweak we made when Christina had a suggestion, I thought we made it stronger. The only it's not so much running from the word, but elimination means the complete removal of the barrier, right? And even if it is the ideal, if it's not possible, we're setting the expectation that it is, right? So that maybe something softer like elimination or mitigation of the barrier, because sometimes it's just going to be a reduction of the barrier, not removal.
Yeah, I mean, this is again where the context and the particulars matter. If it's something like racism and racist language and racist attitudes that are acting as a barrier, then I think elimination is an entirely appropriate way to approach that.
Absolutely.
But if it's something else that is,
A hotspot.
yes,
Well, that would be an example
right.
where we eliminate it.
Yeah.
Then mitigation would make sense. So it really does come down to what we're talking about in particular.
But if it makes it more acceptable to Greg, right? If this is
Well, not just me. I mean, this is my the issue that I have with that word equity is because whenever I think of that elimination, that's when I get to outcomes based, right? Like that's how I see it. Like equal access isn't everything's going to be that everyone that has access is going to have the same outcome. Whenever I read elimination of barriers, so again, I go back. If we talk about English language arts, right? So if it's an AP class and somebody has whatever that barrier is that they can't get an A, is that barrier eliminated? I get that it's in context, but it's the
not what-
equal.
No.
That's not what I'm talking about, Greg. That's
Well, no,
you're
I know, but that's where I get hung up because of the
That's
term
not
equity.
what it is. If you look if you look at educational case law, that's not what it is. It just means access to the AP course. There are literally kids who sometimes don't have access because they might have a language barrier that and they have the skills to be, so you're taking a math AP, they might have a language barrier. Could they be successful in the class? Yeah, they could, or they could not be. It's just giving them the chance to take the class. It has nothing to do with the grade that they earn in the class. You have to earn a grade in a class.
So we're sidebarring over here as well about kind of exactly what we just heard. So if the equity definition were even to be tweaked, shall mean fair treatment, access, and elimination or mitigation of barriers, that's something because of the context that I think would help satisfy what we're hearing because it depends on the context. So I think that would perhaps satisfy what I'm hearing. And I want to hand that over to ask.
But I want to jump back to the definition. If this is a term that students are going to be using outside of Pine-Richland, are we doing them a disservice by making up our own definition that isn't maybe the more widely held definition of equity, even outside of education as well?
I think what we're saying is the definition that we have authored here together is one that is reflective of our combined philosophical stance on what it should and could mean for our students.
And again, I ask the same question. Are we doing our kids, to bring up the point that Dr. Meyer made earlier, is that children are going to be, when they go out into the world, encountering this word, and are we doing a disservice by having a Pine-Richland definition that doesn't necessarily reflect the more wider used term?
I think
The
it's.
wider-
I don't,
wider
wait,
use.
so that's
Yeah.
been
It does
asserted,
reflect.
it's been repeatedly asserted with no support whatsoever to indicate that. It's just been a statement. And I'd like to have that statement
does reflect
be
it.
supported with specific documentation at this point, because it's being asserted over and over. And in this day and age, these things have a way of ringing true because people just keep saying them. I don't agree
does
that our
reflect-
definition is
And then
missing.
my
where-
second part to my question,
Okay.
I did start talking first, so let me
No,
finish.
please, yep, yeah.
Is, are these issues of access more inclusion? Is that more an inclusion issue and making sure that everyone can be included?
Right. So where we are is we're at 7 o'clock and we got to start the next meeting, but I think that there's still more discussion to be had. I know Dr. Miller wants to make some comments, and we've got to recognize our visitors as well and get to our next meeting. So, Dr. Miller, if you would.
So a couple things. First, I love our mission statement for a million reasons. To focus on learning for every student every day. It is the ultimate aspiration. We are not there. And what I love about it is that it is something that we are constantly trying to reach for. We know 4,600 students, 4,600 unique needs. We have to do the very best we can to try to aspire to do that every day. So we say every is the only word that shows up twice. Every is what makes our mission challenging. We have 50 plus policies in our policy manual. There are a lot of words in all of those policies, and we've given this discussion, this policy, as much discussion as any policy I recall, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm using that to benchmark the amount of time and energy that we've spent in talking about it. We want every child of our community to feel loved and supported. We want them to grow, develop, and learn. We want them to feel good when they get out of bed, that they're going to a place where they're going to have an opportunity to learn and grow. They're not going to feel bad for any reason. We have expectations for them. We want them to be on time. We want them to be prepared. We want them to be respectful. We want them to do all sorts of things. But we want everyone to find their place, to be connected, to have friends, if at all possible. We can't make them, but we try to provide an environment and opportunities to engage. That's all a part of our mission, and to me, that's the very top part of the every student policy that we have here. So if tweaking a definition moves the hard work forward, let's tweak it and let's continue. Versus exchanging words, just add to it. But at the end of the day, we're making, I think, incredible progress towards an extremely difficult aspiration. which is every student. Let's keep it up. If we bring it, instead of bringing it forward for a read, I'd say, can we make the adjustments described today? Let everybody continue to marinate and think and reflect and bring it for information. So it's on the agenda, but it's there as information, not action. Allow more discussion to happen during the course of that. And then we determine whether we're ready for a first read or continued dialogue. So it doesn't put pressure, but it doesn't mean standalone meetings. It means we begin to discuss this through the course of our board agenda.
All right, with that, we'll be touching on this subject at our regular meeting, or our planning meeting as well. So I would like to move to item 3.01, the recognition of visitors. I know we have at least 4 speakers.
Yes, and our first speaker is Allison Bash. It should be on.
I'm Allison Bash, 2124 West Grove Drive, parent to my high school senior right here. And I'm also a parent to a Pine-Richland graduate. They both spent most of their K through 12 years. I was raised in a low socioeconomic status Catholic household, and I currently identify as a married, Jewish, bisexual, white upper middle class woman and mother with strong ties to this community where both of my parents were raised in the previously named Richland School District. I'm also a psychologist in our community with a postdoctoral specialty in working with teens. I've worked with kids and teens in Philadelphia, inner city Baltimore, New York, Colorado, and back again here in my hometown in the North Hills of Pittsburgh. I've worked with kids and teens in every setting: hospitals, residential treatment centers, schools, and outpatient treatment. I've worked with diverse clients and done so with an attitude of cultural humility, learning from those who identify differently than me, sometimes through my mistakes and sometimes through my best moments and theirs. One of the biggest lessons I've learned through these experiences is that often if I can change how the adults in the kids' lives are getting along, how they are treating the child and the other adults in the child's life, if I can improve the systems that are supporting them, many of the child's physical, mental, and emotional health issues can be at least mitigated and often resolved. Although I've not typically been able to attend these Monday meetings due to my work schedule, I've stayed up late watching these meetings, learning from and about all of you at this table right now and about our community. I've seen tremendous support from the community for Policy 832, including from community members that may not be here and able to attend and provide their feedback as well. If the board members can come to agreement on the core components of the policy and move forward with implementing it, you all hold the power to create positive change in the lives of thousands of students, staff, and families. Those in the K through 12 buildings now, and those who will be here in the future. In fact, of those who will move to Pine-Richland to be a member of a community that takes pride in the support of every individual member of this district. I know that there may be more time for discussion needed, but I hope we will soon have your full support of Policy 832 that will help us to regularly conduct audits to see where we can be doing better. I hope that we will then have your full support of initiatives born from those audits that will make us stronger. Have the courage to learn. We almost always can do better.
If you could wrap up your statements, Ms. Bash.
When we help others to rise, we all rise together. Thanks for your time and for your service to our community.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Rachel Bash.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bash and I'm a senior here at Pine-Richland. For years, I've advocated for myself and I've advocated for others. Despite many meetings, standing here at the end of my senior year, I'm disappointed at how little has changed. Finally, we have something that could provide the change that our district needs. Policy 832 allows Pine-Richland to be more proactive and to examine how we are doing with diversity across the board. This includes special ed students, Black and brown students, LGBTQ students, and religiously diverse students, just to name a few. With this analysis, we can create programs and resources for certain groups of students. As a result, Pine-Richland will be a more inclusive environment, and every unique individual can embrace their differences alongside the community that Policy 832 will help to create. Although I was not able to be there, I watched and listened closely to the governance meeting that was held on March 14th. I was grateful to see that near the end of the meeting, the board was beginning to reach one another on a positive level concerning Policy 832. However, there were some particular moments that I wanted to touch upon. First, I noticed a misunderstanding between the words equality and equity, which I also noticed here tonight again. Equality means that each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an outcome based on equal access. Nowhere in that definition does it say anything about redistribution of resources. Instead, it is the creation of resources for groups of people that may not be as successful without those resources. Success. From the moment we walk into this district, we are told that we're being set up for success. But what if there are students in the district, children of people sitting in this room right now, who no matter how hard they work, cannot reach their fullest potential because they are not given the necessary resources? Policy 832 can remedy this. Policy 832 can help us embrace all of the differences in our diverse community here at Pine-Richland. The last thing we want to do is live in a colorblind society. Being blind to a student's differences is being blind to that student's culture, lifestyle, and strengths. It is a step backward in helping students get what they need to succeed in this district and as they move into their futures. My hope tonight is that you as a school board will come together to support our community by voting to approve Policy 832. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms. Williams.
Our next speaker is Jen Buse.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Buse. I live off Sandy Hill Road in Richland. Rachel, that was so wonderful. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that I wanted to invite you all. I sent you a message about the unconscious bias workshop that will be happening this Wednesday in the high school auditorium. I think this will be really beneficial for all of us in this community to learn from an expert on DEI. I hope to see that you guys there, those who can make it. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms.
Our next
Williams.
speaker is Callie Stoltz.
Hi, my name is Callie Stoltz, and I'm a senior at Pine-Richland High School. You may wonder why I'm speaking. I'm the only child in my family left or who is left at this school district or who has ever attended this school district. I'm about to leave in a few months, so why should I care? But I am passionate about this policy and leaving behind a school where I know students will be accepted, supported, and met with equity when they walk into the school. Learning for each and every student every day. That is plastered over the walls of the school that I walk through every day, and something I believe must be taken very seriously. What people fail to understand is how much the environment of the school affects a child's ability to learn and succeed. For marginalized children, it is much harder to succeed than it is for example, a straight white male. That isn't to attack those people at all. But unfortunately, it's the simple truth that it is much harder for students who are brown, black, and LGBTQ to succeed in this school. It's easy to sit on a board and make decisions about policies such as these, but it is far different as a student to live in this environment. And that isn't to discount anything that you're saying or discredit any of you in the important work that you do. It is merely to emphasize and educate others on how important student input is, when they are the ones that directly feel the effects of this policy. We aren't asking for perfection, but we are asking for effort and progress. I can't count how many racial, homophobic, anti-Semitic, or ableist slurs casually uttered I hear in a week at school. You must brush off remarks like these and try to persevere through the school day like it is just any other, which is certainly not easy to do day after day. But the idea of Policy 832 isn't meant to point out the negative aspects. It's not meant to point the finger at anyone. It is used to see how we can grow and make the school a more nurturing place where kids can go into the world ready to succeed and accept others. Equity should not be a scary word. We as students do not want to suffer from any potential political biases you may have. This policy is not about politics. It is about the basic human ability to care for other children, even if they are not your own. Helping those children that do not have the same equal or equitable opportunities does not hurt any of the other students. Rather, it helps all students. It helps each and every one to succeed. And this policy lets that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, is that our last speaker? Before we adjourn, it's not to discount all of the speakers that we hear, but myself personally, and I think this will be reiterated by the board, I do appreciate when we hear from our students, especially when we hear from our students in the manner in which those students addressed us. It was very professional. Whether you think it or not, you're ready for the world. Not totally, but you conducted yourselves very well. I appreciate those comments, whether we agree or disagree. Having comments like that is fantastic. So thank you very much. We will adjourn and move to our next meeting. We'll take about a 5-minute recess and start our planning meeting. Thank you.